Millionaire saw the new black janitor protecting his special daughter and is shocked. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Camera phones appeared like magic. Society reporters sensing blood in marble-scented water. Marcus's face flushed red as he realized the situation's implications. Caught on video threatening a teenager while being dressed down by hired help. Have you ever felt drawn to someone's mystery? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The crystal chandelier cast diamond patterns across marble floors as Richard Cole watched his greatest fear materialize, a stranger's hands on his daughter and his billion-dollar empire powerless to stop it. What would you do if your child's safety depended on someone society told you to ignore? Have you ever misjudged someone based on their job or appearance? Tonight, assumptions would crumble faster than stock prices in a crash. The ballroom gleamed with old money and new power, designer gowns swirling between marble columns, while string quartet notes floated above conversations worth millions. But in the corner by the champagne fountain, Trouble wore a $1,000 tuxedo and spoke in whispers that made teenage girls shrink. Richard's fingers tightened around his crystal tumbler as he watched Marcus Whitfield corner his daughter Claire. The heir to Whitfield Industries had the kind of smile that charmed board members and terrified fathers. Too practiced, too hungry, too entitled to hear the word no. Your father owes my family consideration, Marcus whispered, his hand finding Claire's wrist. Maybe you could help facilitate that conversation. Claire's 17-year-old confidence wavered as she tried to step back, but Marcus's grip held firm. Richard started forward, calculating distance and damage control, when movement caught his eye. She appeared like smoke made solid. The janitor he'd barely noticed mopping floors earlier, still wearing her faded uniform among guests worth more than small countries. But something in her posture made Millionaire's step aside without thinking. Something in her eyes made Marcus's predatory smile falter. Let her go. 2 words, spoken with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut crystal. Excuse me? Do you know who I am? Do you know who she is? The janitor's voice remained level, but her stance shifted almost imperceptibly. Richard recognized the change. He'd seen it in corporate boardrooms when negotiations turned deadly serious. She's 17. You're 32. She said no twice. Walk away. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Camera phones appeared like magic, society reporters sensing blood in marble-scented water. Marcus's face flushed red as he realized the situation's implications. Caught on video threatening a teenager while being dressed down by hired help. This isn't over, he hissed, releasing Claire's wrist with enough force to leave fingerprints. Yes, it is. The janitor stepped closer, and something in her movement made Marcus actually flinch. Touch her again, threaten her again, breathe in her direction again, and you'll discover exactly how not over this can get. Marcus retreated through the crowd like smoke dissipating, leaving Claire standing frozen beside the champagne fountain. The janitor turned to her with completely different energy, protective but gentle, fierce but kind. You okay, sweetheart? Claire nodded, tears threatening. Thank you. I didn't know what to do. You did everything right. Sometimes predators count on good girls being too polite to make scenes. She glanced toward Richard, who stood transfixed across the room. Your dad's coming. You're safe now. Richard reached them just as she melted back into the crowd, disappearing among servers and staff like she'd never existed. But the scent of her perfume lingered, something clean and uncomplicated, honest in a room full of expensive lies. Dad, did you see? I saw. His voice caught slightly. Are you hurt? No, she stopped him before. Who is she? Richard stared at the service corridor where she'd vanished. I don't know, but that was a lie. Something about her movement, her voice, the way she commanded space without demanding attention. It tugged at memories he'd buried under years of success and carefully constructed walls. Later, alone in his office with Atlanta's skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, Richard pulled up employee files with shaking fingers. The security footage showed everything. Marcus's aggression, Claire's fear, and the janitor's intervention. But it also showed something else that made his chest tight. The way she'd looked at his daughter with genuine care. The way she'd positioned herself between threat and innocent without hesitation. Danielle Brooks, hired 3 weeks ago through the cleaning service. References checked out, background clear, no red flags in her file. But something about her efficiency reports bothered him. Too thorough, too observant, like someone trained to notice what others missed. He was still staring at her employee photo when his head of security knocked. "Sir? About tonight's incident. What about it?" We ran a deeper background check on the woman who intervened. The man's voice carried weight that made Richard's spine stiffen. "Sir, we have a problem." Richard looked up from Danielle's photo. Professional smile, intelligent eyes, face that somehow managed to be both beautiful and forgettable. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where Danielle Brooks doesn't exist. At least, not the version working in your building." The words hit like ice water in his veins. He'd built his empire on information, on knowing everything about everyone who came within a mile of his daughter. But the woman who just saved Claire was a ghost with a mop bucket and eyes that had seen things that left shadows. Drop a comment if you've ever been surprised by someone's hidden strength. When did someone prove your first impression completely wrong? But who was this woman really? And why did she risk everything for a stranger's child? As Richard watched security footage loop endlessly, her confident stance, her protective instincts, her mysterious disappearance, he realized something that made his blood run both hot and cold. His daughter was safer in the hands of a complete stranger than she'd ever been surrounded by his $1 million security team. And that terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever could. He built his empire on information, but the woman who just saved his daughter was a ghost with a mop bucket and eyes that had seen war. Have you ever felt drawn to someone's mystery? Tell me about a time when not knowing everything made someone more attractive, not less. The executive floor stood empty except for the soft hum of computers and the distant sound of vacuum cleaners 3 floors below. Richard's office windows overlooked the city, but tonight he couldn't focus on anything except the classified military file spread across his mahogany desk. Staff Sergeant Danielle Brooks, Army Intelligence, 3 tours overseas, decorated for valor. Then nothing. A black hole in the records that started 18 months ago, like she'd simply stopped existing. But ghosts don't save teenage girls at charity galas. Ghosts don't have steady hands and voices that make grown men back down without raising a single threat. The elevator chimed softly, and Richard looked up to find her standing in his doorway, still in her janitor's uniform, still carrying that quiet authority that made his expensive suit feel like costume jewelry. "Working late, Mr. Cole." Her voice held the same steadiness that had faced down Marcus Whitfield, but something else lurked underneath. Amusement, maybe. Or challenge. "I could ask you the same thing." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." She entered, but didn't sit, instead moving to his windows with the fluid precision of someone accustomed to assessing threats and exits. Her reflection ghosted across the glass, superimposed over Atlanta's glittering skyline. "Your daughter's safe?" she said without turning around. "Marcus won't approach her again. How can you be so certain?" Now she turned, and for the first time he saw her smile. Not the professional politeness from the gala, but something real and slightly dangerous. Because men like Marcus understand only one language: consequences. I spoke to him in terms he couldn't misunderstand. Richard studied her face, searching for tells like he would in a corporate negotiation. "You're not really a janitor." "No. No elaboración, no justificación. Just truth delivered with military efficiency." "Then what are you?" She moved closer to his desk, and he caught that clean scent again. Soap and determination. Honesty in a world built on careful deceptions. Someone who recognizes when good people need protection from bad ones. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting tonight. She paused at his desk's edge, fingers brushing the military file he'd left open. "You've been busy. My daughter's safety is my priority." "Good. It should be." Her eyes met his, and he saw something there that made his breath catch. understanding, maybe, or recognition. You don't trust easily. Should I? No. The honesty hit him like cold water. But your daughter shouldn't pay for our caution. The elevator arrived with soft precision, doors opening to reveal the building's after-hours emptiness. She stepped inside, then turned back to face him, her expression unreadable in the corridor's soft lighting. You don't trust easily, she observed, studying his face in the elevator's golden glow. Good. Neither do I. But your daughter shouldn't pay for our caution. He found himself moving toward the elevator, drawn by something he couldn't name. The doors began to close, but she held them with one hand, waiting. Join me. It wasn't a request. It wasn't quite a command. It was an invitation to step outside his controlled world and into something unknown. Richard Cole, who hadn't made an impulsive decision in 15 years, stepped into the elevator. The building's floors counted down in digital silence as they descended together, and with each number, he felt his carefully constructed world shifting. She stood close enough that he could see the small scar on her left hand, could count the threads in her uniform's worn fabric, could notice how her stillness suggested coiled energy rather than relaxation. Why did you really help Claire tonight? He asked. Because nobody else would. My security team, your security team, was watching for external threats. They missed the one wearing a tuxedo and family name. Her voice carried no judgment, just observation. Predators count on that blind spot. The elevator stopped between the 15th and 14th floors, emergency lights flickering on as the building's automated systems kicked in. They were trapped in soft lighting and sudden intimacy, the city's hum muffled by steel and silence. Emergency protocols, she said calmly, checking her watch. Maintenance will have us moving in about 10 minutes. You don't seem concerned. I've been in worse places. She leaned against the elevator's back wall, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked almost relaxed. Besides, this gives us time to talk. About what? About why you really pulled my file. About what you're hoping to find. Her eyes held his in the emergency lighting's gentle glow. About why you're more curious than afraid. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. He was curious about her background, her motivations, the way she moved through his world like she belonged there while simultaneously standing apart from it. I need to know who's around my daughter. Fair enough. She was quiet for a moment, then, I remember you. The words hit him like electricity. What? Charlotte, North Carolina. 7 years ago. Construction project for the new military housing complex. Her voice carried weight now, history and shared memory. You were younger then, hungrier, less careful about who you trusted. Memory crashed over him like a wave. Summer heat and blueprints, a military liaison with intelligent eyes and a smile that made him forget every rule about mixing business with pleasure. They'd worked together for 3 months, building something that mattered, before her deployment orders came through. He'd never forgotten her, but he'd convinced himself he'd imagined the connection, the way she'd looked at him across conference tables, the almost kiss interrupted by her sudden transfer to classified operations. Danielle. Her name felt familiar on his tongue, like coming home after years of wandering. Hello, Richard. When the elevator shuddered back to life and emergency lights faded to normal, they stood in completely different territory. 7 years collapsed between them like paper walls, but neither moved to create distance. Why are you here? He asked as the doors opened to the lobby's marble emptiness. Because someone's been watching your family, and I'm the only thing standing between them and Claire. The words followed him into sleep and haunted his dreams. Not the threat itself, but the certainty in her voice, the protective instinct that had brought her back into his life when he needed her most. Some connections transcend time and circumstance, but when the past collides with the present, not everyone survives the impact. Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past and realized the connection was even stronger than you remembered? Share your second chance story below. Charlotte's summer heat had been oppressive that year, turning construction sites into furnaces where young Richard Cole learned that ambition without direction was just expensive sweat. The military liaison had been professional, efficient, untouchable, until the night she smiled at him across blueprints and made him forget every rule about mixing business with pleasure. Now, 7 years later, she stood in his penthouse living room like a memory made solid, still beautiful but changed. Harder around the edges, more careful with her trust. Morning light through floor-to-ceiling windows painted her in gold and shadow as she studied the city spread below like a battlefield map. "You've done well for yourself," she said without turning around. "Have I?" Richard poured coffee with hands that weren't quite steady, hyper-aware of her presence in his carefully controlled space. "Most days I feel like I'm just trying to stay ahead of the next disaster. That's called being a parent." Now she did turn, accepting the coffee mug with fingers that briefly brushed his. The contact lasted half a second, but left heat in its wake. "Claire's lucky to have you." "Is she?" "Sometimes I wonder if all this," he gestured at the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the view that cost more per month than most people made in a year, if it makes her a target more than it protects her. "Money doesn't create predators, Richard. It just gives them different hunting grounds." Danielle moved to the leather sofa, but perched on its edge like someone ready to run or fight at a moment's notice. Marcus Whitfield would have cornered some girl last night, regardless of her father's net worth. The difference is, most girls don't have someone willing to step in. "Why did you?" "Step in, I mean." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I know what it feels like to be cornered by someone who thinks your fear is their entertainment." The words carried weight that made his chest tight. He wanted to ask for details, to understand what had shaped the woman sitting in his living room drinking coffee like it was a peace treaty. But something in her posture warned against pushing. "Tell me about Charlotte," she said instead, deflecting with practiced ease. "You were there. You remember." "I remember the work. The blueprints and budget meetings and your absolute refusal to cut corners, even when the brass pressured you." Her smile carried warmth now, memory softening the careful edges she showed the world. "But I want to know what you remember." Richard sat across from her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, far enough to maintain the illusion of casual conversation. "I remember thinking you were the most competent person I'd ever worked with, and the most beautiful, smooth talker. I remember our last night before your deployment. The restaurant with terrible service and excellent wine." He paused, caught between past and present. "I remember almost kissing you in the parking lot. Almost. Your orders came through that morning. Classified assignment, immediate departure." The old frustration bubbled up, sharper than he'd expected. One day you were there. The next you'd vanished like you'd never existed. Danielle set down her coffee mug with careful precision. "That assignment lasted 4 years. When it ended, I had a choice. Come back to the world I'd left, or disappear completely. You chose disappearance. Ich chose survival." Her voice held finality, but her eyes suggested the story was more complicated. "Some things you can't come back from, Richard. Some missions change you in ways that make normal life impossible. But you're here now. I'm here because your daughter needed protection, and I owed you a debt." The words stung more than they should have. A debt. Charlotte was supposed to be a simple consulting job. Instead, you treated me like an equal partner. You listened to my ideas, implemented my suggestions, gave me credit in front of people who mattered. She stood, pacing to the windows again like movement could outrun uncomfortable truths. "Most men saw the uniform and assumed I was there to take notes and look pretty. You saw someone worth trusting. Because you were. Because you were different." She turned back to face him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "Are you still?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. 7 years of separate lives, of carefully constructed walls and hard-learned lessons, of success and failure, and the slow accumulation of scars both visible and hidden. "I never forgot you," he said quietly. "But you convinced yourself you'd imagine how much I mattered." The accuracy of her observation hit like a physical blow. "How did you?" "Because I did the same thing." She moved closer, close enough that he could see the pulse at her throat, could smell that clean scent that had haunted his dreams. Easier to believe it was just proximity and adrenaline than admit we'd found something real. And now your daughter trusts me more than she trusts your $1 million security team. Her smile held challenge and promise in equal measure. Now you're looking at me like you did 7 years ago, before duty and distance convinced us both to be practical. Danielle, she stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her warmth, could see the way her pulse jumped when he said her name. Richard, I didn't come back to Atlanta by accident. Someone's been watching your family, and I'm the only thing standing between them and Claire. The words hit like ice water, shattering the moment's intimacy with brutal reality. Richard's protective instincts flared, sharp and immediate. What kind of threat? The kind that uses people like Marcus Whitfield as distractions while the real danger moves in shadows. She backed away, professional distance reasserting itself like armor. The kind that knows your weaknesses better than you do. How long? 3 months. Maybe longer. Her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. They've been patient, methodical, testing your security, mapping your routines, looking for the perfect moment to strike. Richard's world shifted, expensive furniture and city views fading to background noise as survival instincts he'd thought buried under years of boardroom battles roared to life. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to be sure. Because accusations without proof just sound like paranoia. She moved to the windows again, studying the street below with tactical awareness. And because I needed to know if you were still the man I remembered, someone worth trusting when everything falls apart. And now you know. She looked back at him over her shoulder, and the intensity in her gaze made his chest tight. Now, I know we're going to need each other if we want to keep Claire safe. She'd spent a decade learning to kill efficiently, but protecting Richard's daughter awakened something fiercer than any battlefield training ever could. What would you do if someone you barely knew risked everything to protect what matters most to you? How do you handle that kind of debt? The penthouse apartment stretched across the top floor like a fortress made of glass and steel, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Atlanta's skyline. But no amount of height or luxury could keep danger from finding them. It just made the fall more devastating. Danielle moved through Richard's home with the quiet efficiency of someone conducting a tactical assessment. Her fingers traced door frames and window locks, checking sight lines and escape routes with professional thoroughness that made his expensive security system look like toy store decoration. Your weak points are obvious, she said, testing the weight of his sliding glass doors. Too much glass, too many access points, and your security team thinks like bodyguards instead of soldiers. What's the difference? Bodyguards react to threats. Soldiers eliminate them before they become problems. She turned from the windows, and he saw something in her expression that made his blood chill. Someone's been photographing your building for 2 weeks. Different people, different cameras, but coordinated surveillance. Richard's protective instincts roared to life. Claire is safe. For now. Danielle pulled out her phone, swiping to a series of photographs that made his hands shake. But they're not just watching the building. They're mapping your routines, timing your movements, documenting everyone who matters to you. The photos showed Claire walking to school, entering her favorite coffee shop, laughing with friends outside the movie theater. Ordinary moments turned sinister by the knowledge that strangers had been measuring her life for opportunities. How do you know all this? Because I've been watching the watchers. She put the phone away, but the images burned in his memory. Military training doesn't disappear just because you change careers. I see patterns, notice things that don't belong. Like what? Like the maintenance worker who spent 40 minutes fixing a streetlight outside Claire's school, but never touched his tools. Like the jogger who's run the same route past your office building every day for 3 weeks, but never breaks a sweat. Her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to life or death observations. Like the fact that Marcus Whitfield's harassment last night wasn't random. It was designed to test your response time and create chaos. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. They used him, and he probably doesn't even know it. Someone fed him information about Claire's routine, suggested the gala as an opportunity, maybe even coached him on what to say. Danielle moved to the kitchen island, spreading out building blueprints with practiced efficiency. The real question is what they're planning next. Richard studied the blueprints, seeing his home through tactical eyes for the first time. Every luxury became a liability, every convenience a potential vulnerability. What do you recommend? Short term? A move into the guest wing. Claire doesn't go anywhere without escort. Your routines become unpredictable. She traced security camera positions with her finger, marking blind spots in red ink. Long term? We figure out who wants your family hurt and why. You want to move in here? Something flickered in her expression. Amusement, maybe, or recognition of the implications. Unless you know someone else qualified to keep your daughter alive. The challenge in her voice made something twist in his chest. 7 years ago, he'd been fascinated by her competence. Now, watching her transform his home into a tactical briefing room, fascination had evolved into something deeper and more dangerous. What about your other job? The janitorial service won't appreciate. That was cover. I've been working private security for 18 months, specializing in situations where official protection isn't enough. She looked up from the blueprints, and her smile carried darker implications. Sometimes parents need someone willing to cross lines that legal authorities can't. The words sent ice through his veins. What kind of lines? The kind that keep children safe when playing by the rules means letting predators win. Her voice remained steady, but something in her eyes suggested history he didn't want to imagine. I'm very good at my job, Richard, but I only take cases where protecting innocence justifies whatever methods become necessary. And you think Claire's case justifies those methods? I think whoever's targeting your family has already crossed every line that matters. She rolled up the blueprints with military precision. Question is, are you willing to trust someone who might have to cross them back? Richard stared at her across his kitchen island, seeing not the polished professional from their Charlotte days, but something harder, more dangerous. 7 years of unknown experiences had changed her, shaped her into someone capable of violence he couldn't imagine, but protection he desperately needed. How do I know you're not part of the threat? The question hung between them like a blade, sharp enough to cut through attraction and shared history. Danielle's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, the stillness of someone weighing responses and their consequences. You don't, she said finally. Trust is always a choice made without complete information. But I'll give you this. If I wanted to hurt your family, Claire would already be gone. The brutal honesty hit harder than any reassurance could have. This wasn't the woman he'd almost kissed in a Charlotte parking lot. Wasn't the professional consultant who'd helped him build housing for military families. This was someone forged by experiences that left scars in places he couldn't see. Someone who'd learned that sometimes love meant being willing to become the monster that kept worse monsters at bay. How long? He asked quietly. How long what? How long have you been watching us? Before the surveillance, before the gala, before you took the janitorial job. His voice carried suspicion and something else. Hope, maybe, that her protection had started before the official threat. How long have you been keeping Claire safe without me knowing? Danielle's careful mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something vulnerable underneath. 6 months. Ever since I heard about Elena's death and realized you were raising Claire alone. His wife's name hit like a physical blow, memories of loss and grief still sharp enough to cut. You knew Elena? I knew of her. Military networks are small, and news travels fast when someone connected to our world dies young. She paused, studying his face with the same intensity she'd brought to building blueprints. I also knew you'd do anything to protect what she left behind. So you came to Atlanta because good men raising daughters alone need someone watching their backs. And I was between assignments. Her smile carried warmth that transformed her face. And because I never forgot Charlotte either. The admission landed with unexpected force, shattering the professional distance she'd maintained since entering his life. Suddenly, they weren't security specialist and client. They were two people who'd found each other twice across impossible circumstances, drawn together by forces neither fully understood. Danielle. Claire's voice cut through the moment like a fire alarm. Dad, why are there blueprints on the kitchen counter? And why does it look like someone's planning a military operation in our living room? Richard turned to find his daughter standing in the doorway, school bag slung over her shoulder, an expression caught between curiosity and alarm. In the space of 12 hours, his carefully controlled world had become something unrecognizable. And now he had to explain to his 17-year-old daughter that their lives were in danger from enemies he couldn't name. But when he looked back at Danielle, saw the way she'd positioned herself between Claire and the windows without conscious thought, he realized something that should have terrified him, but instead brought unexpected peace. For the first time since Elena's death, he wasn't protecting his daughter alone. The distance between bodyguard and client measured exactly 18 inches. The space she maintained until the night, he pulled her close, and she forgot every rule about professional boundaries. When is it okay to cross professional boundaries for love? Have you ever had to choose between doing your job and following your heart? The guest wing hummed with expensive silence. Marble floors muffled by Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars. But wealth couldn't muffle the sound of her breathing through thin walls, or the way his footsteps paused outside her door each night before continuing to his own room. 3 days of living under the same roof had created an intimacy that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with shared purpose. Danielle moved through his home like she belonged there, checking locks and monitoring security feeds, but also helping Claire with calculus homework and laughing at Richard's attempts to make pancakes that didn't resemble charcoal. You know, Claire said over breakfast, watching Danielle efficiently flip eggs while simultaneously reviewing overnight security reports. You're the first person Dad's trusted around me who doesn't treat me like I might break. You're not made of glass, Danielle replied, sliding perfect eggs onto Claire's plate. Strong young women don't need cotton wool protection. They need someone who recognizes their strength. Richard watched the exchange with something twisting in his chest. His daughter had never warmed to anyone this quickly, never shown the easy affection she displayed around Danielle. And Danielle, whose military bearings softened whenever Claire entered the room, clearly returned that protective instinct. I have to ask, he said after Claire left for school with her new security detail, do you always get this invested in your clients' families? Danielle paused in her review of overnight surveillance footage, but didn't look away from the monitors. No. Then why? Because Claire reminds me of myself at her age. Smart, stubborn, too trusting for her own good. She switched camera angles, scanning for threats with practiced efficiency. And because her father would die before letting anything happen to her, which makes him dangerous to the kind of people who hurt children for profit. Is that what this is about? Profit. It's always about profit, Richard. Question is what kind: money, power, revenge, or the simple satisfaction of destroying something good. She finally looked at him, and the intensity in her gaze made his breath catch. But we'll figure that out. Right now, I'm more concerned about maintaining proper boundaries. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Professional distance had been eroding steadily since she'd moved in, replaced by domestic intimacy that felt more real than any relationship he'd built since Elena's death. What kind of boundaries? The kind where I remember you're paying me to protect your daughter, not to make coffee in your kitchen wearing your old university sweatshirt. She gestured to the oversized Harvard shirt she'd borrowed that morning when her own clothes were in the wash. The kind where we don't pretend this setup is anything other than temporary professional arrangement. But even as she spoke, she made no move to change clothes or create physical distance. The sweatshirt hung to her mid-thigh, making her look younger and softer than the tactical professional who'd interrupted Marcus Whitfield's harassment. And what if it's not? He asked quietly. Not what? Temporary. Professional. He moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. What if this? He gestured between them, at the domestic scene they'd unconsciously created. What if this is something else? Then we're both making a mistake that could get Claire killed. But her voice carried less conviction than her words suggested. Personal feelings compromise judgment. Compromised judgment gets people hurt, or it gives you something worth fighting harder to protect. She turned fully to face him then, and he saw the war in her expression. Professional training battling personal desire, duty wrestling with the kind of connection that transcended logic and circumstance. "Richard, I haven't felt like this since Charlotte," he admitted, stepping close enough to see the pulse at her throat. "Oh, I haven't felt like this since Elena died. Like maybe there's something worth risking everything for." "Don't." But she didn't move away. "Don't make this about your wife. Don't make me a replacement for something you lost. You're not a replacement for anything." His hand found her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "You're something new. Something I never thought I'd find again." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of security monitors and the distant sound of Atlanta traffic far below. Danielle's eyes searched his face like she was memorizing details, cataloging everything she saw for future reference. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Probably. Your daughter's safety depends on you staying focused and clear-headed." His thumb traced her lower lip, and she leaned into the touch despite herself. "Does this feel unfocused to you?" "It feels dangerous." "Good dangerous or bad dangerous?" Her smile transformed her face, bringing back glimpses of the woman he'd almost kissed in a Charlotte parking lot 7 years ago. "Both." When he lowered his head, she rose to meet him halfway, and the first touch of their lips felt like coming home after years of wandering. She tasted like coffee and possibilities, like chances taken and boundaries crossed for reasons that transcended logic. The kiss deepened, professional distance dissolving under the weight of 7 years' worth of suppressed attraction and present need. His hands found her waist, lifting her onto the marble countertop as surveillance reports scattered to expensive tile floors. "We shouldn't," she breathed against his mouth. "No," he agreed, positioning himself between her knees. "But we are." Her legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer as her mouth found his throat. The Harvard sweatshirt rode up, exposing smooth skin that made his hands shake as he traced patterns across her ribs. "If we do this," she said, pulling back enough to meet his eyes, "everything changes. Everything already changed the moment you stepped between Marcus Whitfield and my daughter." His voice carried certainty that surprised him. "This is just us admitting it." She studied his face with the same intensity she brought to threat assessment, searching for lies or uncertainty or the kind of hesitation that could destroy them both. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she smiled. The first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her. "Then we do this right," she said, sliding off the counter with fluid grace. "No half measures, no pretending it's just physical, no walking away when things get complicated. They're already complicated. They're about to get worse." Her smile held promise and warning in equal measure. "Because someone's been watching this building for 3 days, and tonight they're planning to test our defenses." The words shattered the moment's intimacy, snapping him back to harsh reality. "How do you know?" "Because I know how predators think. They've seen me move in, cataloged our routines, measured our responses." She moved to the security monitors with renewed focus, but something had shifted. The careful distance was gone, replaced by partnership that felt as dangerous as it was necessary. Tonight, they'll make their move. Richard's protective instincts flared, sharp and immediate. "What kind of move?" "The kind designed to separate you from Claire long enough for them to take what they want." She pulled up building schematics on her tablet, marking potential breach points in red. "They'll create a crisis that requires your immediate attention. Probably something business-related that can't wait, while simultaneously creating an opportunity to access Claire. Then we don't take the bait. We do take the bait, but we control the terms." Her smile carried darker implications. "They want to test our defenses? Let's give them something worth testing." The security footage showed everything. How he'd reached for her face, how she'd leaned into his touch, how they'd forgotten the world existed. But it also showed something else, a figure in the garden shadows, camera in hand, documenting their every intimate moment. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen them cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. And tonight, that someone was planning to use their newfound vulnerability against them. But as Richard watched Danielle transform back into the tactical professional who'd saved his daughter, he realized something that should have terrified him, but instead brought unexpected clarity. He'd rather face any threat with her than face safety alone. Privacy died at the speed of light when photos of Atlanta's most eligible bachelor and his mysterious bodyguard hit social media. But the real threat wasn't public scrutiny. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution spread across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. Headlines screaming speculation about the billionaire's mystery woman, while photographers camped outside his building like an invading army armed with telephoto lenses. Richard's fingers traced the newspaper photo. Him and Danielle caught in an unguarded moment outside his office building, her hand on his arm, both of them looking at each other with unmistakable intimacy. The caption read, "Cole's secret security, love or liability?" His phone buzzed constantly. Board members, business partners, social climbers fishing for information. Everyone wanted to know about the woman who'd captured Atlanta's most untouchable bachelor. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Channel 5 is requesting a statement about your relationship status." "No comment," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "How do you explain that the woman cleaning offices after midnight was the same person who could disarm a threat in 3 moves? How do you tell the world that she'd become essential to his breathing?" The elevator doors opened, and Danielle stepped out carrying cleaning supplies like armor. She moved with that same fluid confidence, but Richard caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "Enjoying your 15 minutes of fame?" she asked, setting down her equipment. "This isn't what I wanted for you." She approached his desk, studying the newspaper spread. "What you wanted was protection for Claire. Everything else is just noise." But Richard saw something flicker in her expression, concern, maybe fear. "The attention bothers you. Attention gets people killed in my line of work." She picked up one of the papers, scanning the speculative article about her background. "They're digging, Richard. How long before they find something that compromises everything?" He stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough to smell her subtle perfume mixed with industrial cleaning products. The combination shouldn't have been appealing, but on her, it was intoxicating. "Let them dig," he said quietly. "I don't care what they find." "You should." Her voice carried warning. "Some stones are better left unturned." Before he could respond, his office door burst open. Marcus Whitfield strode in without invitation, his face flushed with righteous indignation. "Richard, we need to talk." "About your little janitor situation." Danielle stepped back, but Richard moved forward, positioning himself between them. "You'll show her respect in my office." Marcus laughed, the sound grating. "Respect? For what? A cleaning woman who's manipulated her way into your bed? Do you have any idea what the board is saying?" "I don't care what. They're questioning your judgment," Marcus interrupted. "Your leadership. Some are suggesting you're unfit to run the company if you could be so easily influenced by a piece of." Danielle's hand touched Richard's arm, stopping him from launching himself at Marcus. Her touch was gentle, but he felt the coiled strength underneath. "It's okay," she said softly. "Men like him only understand power. Show him yours." Richard straightened, every inch the billionaire CEO who'd built an empire from nothing. "Marcus, you have 5 seconds to apologize to Ms. Brooks and leave my office voluntarily." "Richard, be reasonable." "For seconds." Marcus's face reddened. "The board won't stand for this. You're risking everything for a woman who—" 3 seconds. Richard's voice could have frozen water. Something in his tone finally penetrated Marcus's arrogance. The older man took a step back, suddenly remembering who held the real power in the room. "This isn't over," Marcus muttered, but he headed for the door. "Yes, it is," Richard said quietly. "Clean out your office. You're terminated, effective immediately." The door slammed behind Marcus, leaving heavy silence. Richard turned to find Danielle watching him with something like admiration. "That was expensive," she observed. "Worth every penny." She moved closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "You can't fight the whole world for me, Richard. Watch me." The kiss came without planning, desperate and hungry. Against his office windows, with the city lights painting her skin in gold and shadow, she claimed him with fierce need. Her hands worked his shirt buttons with military efficiency, while his mouth found the soft spot below her ear that made her breath catch. "Let them watch," she whispered against his throat. "Let them see what real protection looks like." The irony wasn't lost on him. She was protecting him again, this time from his own reputation. But as her teeth grazed his neck, he stopped caring about anything except the woman in his arms. Later, as they straightened their clothes and tried to look professional again, Danielle's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and Richard saw her face go pale. "What is it?" She showed him the screen. A text message with no sender information, just words that made his blood run cold. "Publicity has consequences. Ask your daughter." Richard was already reaching for his phone when it rang. Claire's school caller ID showed. "Mr. Cole, this is Principal Harrison. I'm afraid there's been an incident." As Richard listened to details about photographers harassing Claire outside the school, attempting to get quotes about her father's relationship, he felt rage building in his chest like pressure in a boiler. "Is she safe?" he managed. "She's fine, but shaken. We've moved her to the administrative office until you can arrange pickup." Richard ended the call and looked at Danielle, who was already grabbing her jacket. "This stops now," he said. "Agreed. But stopping it might require methods your reputation can't survive." He thought of Claire, scared and confused, paying the price for his happiness. "I don't care about my reputation. You will when the headlines read, 'Billionaire's bodyguard breaks reporter's camera.' Or worse." They rode the elevator down in tense silence, but Richard felt something shifting between them. The outside pressure wasn't driving them apart. It was forging them into something stronger. In the parking garage, as they headed for his car, Danielle suddenly stopped. Her hand moved to her jacket, where Richard now realized she kept a weapon. "Someone's watching us," she said softly. Richard looked around, but saw nothing unusual. "Where?" "Gray sedan, third row. Telephoto lens. Been following me for 2 days. Media?" Her smile was sharp as a blade. Only one way to find out. Before Richard could stop her, she was walking directly toward the sedan with purposeful strides. Richard hurried after her, fascination warring with concern as he watched her transform from his lover into something predatory. The car engine started as she approached, but Danielle was faster. She reached the driver's door just as it began to back out, her hand slamming against the window hard enough to spider the glass. The car stopped. Richard caught up as Danielle was speaking quietly to the driver through the broken window. He couldn't hear her words, but he could see the effect. The man's face had gone white with terror. "Understand?" she asked in a normal voice. The driver nodded frantically. "Good. And tell your employer that some people are harder to intimidate than others." She stepped back, allowing the car to flee the garage with squealing tires. "What did you say to him?" Richard asked. "Nothing threatening. Just explain the facts of life." Her smile was innocent, but her eyes held echoes of whatever the driver had seen. They collected Claire without incident, but Richard noticed how Danielle positioned herself to shield his daughter from the lingering photographers. Claire, for her part, seemed to draw comfort from Danielle's presence. "Are you really Dad's girlfriend?" Claire asked as they drove home. Richard glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing his daughter's curious expression. "It's complicated," Danielle said diplomatically. "Adults always say that when the answer is yes, but they're scared to admit it." From the mouths of babes. Richard caught Danielle's slight smile and felt something warm expand his chest. But the warmth froze when they arrived home to find an envelope taped to the front door. Richard's name written in block letters, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, Claire walking to school that morning, unaware of the camera following her every step. On the back, someone had written, "She can't protect what she can't see coming." The note wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to Claire, with a photo of her walking to school that morning. When they threatened his money, he'd hired lawyers. When they threatened his business, he'd hired competitors. But when they threatened his daughter, he discovered what it meant to trust someone with everything. The safe house nestled in Georgia mountains like a secret wrapped in pine trees and morning mist, its rustic exterior hiding security systems that would make government facilities envious. But even here, surrounded by nature's peace, danger felt like a hunting predator circling just beyond the tree line. Richard stood at the kitchen window, watching Danielle teach Claire basic self-defense moves on the wooden deck. His daughter's laughter mixed with morning bird song, creating a soundtrack of normalcy that felt both precious and fragile. "She's good with her," he said into his phone. "Danielle's always been good with kids," came the voice of Agent Sarah Martinez, Danielle's handler. "It's why we chose her for this assignment." Assignment. The word still stung, even though Richard understood the reality. Danielle hadn't walked into his life by accident. She'd been sent to protect his family from a threat he'd never seen coming. How long before it's safe to go back to Atlanta? That depends on how quickly we can identify who's been targeting your family. The investigation is ongoing, but these people are professional, patient. They've been watching you for months. Through the window, Richard saw Danielle correct Claire's stance, her touch gentle but firm. Claire beamed at the praise, soaking up the attention from the woman who'd become more than a bodyguard. "Mr. Cole," Agent Martinez's voice brought him back to the conversation. "I'm here. There's something else. We've been monitoring chatter, and there's reason to believe the threat against your family isn't random. Someone specifically wants to hurt you, and they're using Claire as leverage." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. "Who? We're working on it. In the meantime, stay put. Let Danielle do her job." The call ended, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts and fears. Through the window, he watched his daughter attempt a defensive move Danielle had just demonstrated. Claire stumbled, but instead of laughing at her mistake, Danielle steadied her and patiently explained the technique again. The sight hit Richard like a physical blow. When had Danielle become so essential to Claire's happiness? When had his daughter started looking at another woman with such trust and affection? The answer was simple. The moment Danielle had proven she would risk everything to keep Claire safe. "Dad!" Claire's voice called from outside. "Come learn this with us." Richard stepped onto the deck, immediately aware of how Danielle's presence changed the air around him. Even in tactical clothing and hiking boots, she radiated a confidence that made his pulse quicken. "Basic defensive positioning," she explained, moving to stand beside him, "in case someone grabs you from behind." Her hands guided his arms into the proper stance, and Richard struggled to focus on the technique instead of her touch. Her palms were warm against his forearms, calloused from years of training, but gentle in their guidance. "The key is not to struggle," she continued, her voice professional despite the intimacy of their position. "Use their momentum against them." She demonstrated the movement, her body flowing against his in a way that had nothing to do with self-defense and everything to do with the attraction that had been building between them since that night in the ballroom. "Like this?" he asked, following her guidance. "Exactly." Her smile was approval and something warmer. Natural instinct is to fight harder, but sometimes the smart move is to yield first, then strike. Claire giggled. "You two look like you're dancing." He crept up Richard's neck, but Danielle just laughed. "Combat has rhythm, just like dancing. The difference is the consequences of missing a step." As the morning progressed into afternoon, Richard found himself watching Danielle with new eyes. She moved through the safe house like she belonged there, checking security systems with professional thoroughness while somehow making the sterile space feel like home. "Coffee?" she offered, finding him on the living room couch with his laptop. "Please." She settled beside him, close enough that he could smell her shampoo mixed with the pine scent drifting through open windows. Outside, Claire was reading on the deck, lost in a book and looking more relaxed than she had in weeks. "She's adapting well," Danielle observed. "Kids are resilient. It's the adults who struggle with change." Danielle's laugh was soft. Speaking from experience, Richard closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "When Elena died, I thought I knew what loss felt like. But this, the possibility of losing Claire, of losing you, it's different. Richard, I know this started as an assignment," he continued. "I know you were sent to protect us. But what I feel for you, what I see between you and Claire, that's real." Danielle was quiet for a long moment, her coffee cup cradled between her hands like she was warming herself against sudden cold. "I've never had anything to lose before," she said finally. "Every assignment was just a job. But this—" She gestured toward Claire, toward the space between them. "This is terrifying. Good terrifying or bad terrifying?" Her smile was soft, the kind that makes you want to fight harder to keep it. Before Richard could respond, his phone rang. "Unknown number." "Don't answer," Danielle said immediately. But something made him hesitate. What if it's about Claire? The phone continued ringing. On the fourth ring, Danielle nodded grimly. "Mr. Cole." The voice was artificially distorted, but definitely male. "I hope you're enjoying your little mountain retreat." Richard's blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "Someone who's grown tired of waiting." "You see, Richard, you have something that belongs to me, and I want it back." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Now it's time to settle her debts." "Elena." Richard's vision blurred with sudden rage. "My wife has been dead for 5 years." "Has she?" The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone, his hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. Beside him, Danielle was already moving, checking locks and window positions with military efficiency. "What did Elena take?" she asked without stopping her security sweep. "I don't know. She managed our charitable foundation, handled some investments." His voice trailed off as a horrible possibility occurred to him. "Unless—" "What?" "She had access to our international accounts. If she was moving money for the foundation and skimming some for herself." Danielle's expression was grim. "How much money?" "Enough to kill for." Outside, Claire looked up from her book, sensing the tension even through the glass doors. Her face showed confusion and fear, and Richard realized she'd heard his raised voice. Danielle followed his gaze. "We need to move. Now. But this is supposed to be secure." "Nowhere is secure if they found this location." She was already gathering essential items, her movements swift and purposeful. "Pack light. We have maybe 10 minutes before." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red light that made the safe house feel like a target. Through the windows, Richard could see Claire standing on the deck, her book forgotten as she stared at the dark forest surrounding them. "Claire," he called, but Danielle was already moving. She reached the deck door first, pulling Claire inside with one fluid motion while her other hand drew a weapon Richard hadn't known she was carrying. "Basement," she ordered. "Both of you." "Now." "What about?" "Now, Richard." Her tone brooked no argument. Richard grabbed Claire's hand, feeling his daughters trembling as they hurried toward the basement stairs. Behind them, Danielle moved with deadly purpose, checking sight lines and defensive positions like she was planning for war. Because that's exactly what this was. The basement had been equipped as a panic room, with reinforced walls and independent communication systems. As soon as they were secure, Danielle activated multiple monitors showing exterior camera feeds. "There," she pointed to screen 3. 2 figures moving through the trees, southeast approach. Richard saw them, shadows that moved with too much purpose to be hikers. "How did they find us?" "Questions later. Right now, we survive." She handed him a pistol, and Richard was surprised by how natural it felt in his grip. "You know how to use this?" "Hunting trips with my father." "Good enough." She turned to Claire, her voice gentle despite the circumstances. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay exactly where I put you, and don't move until either your father or I come get you. Can you do that?" Claire nodded, her face pale but determined. "That's my brave girl." The monitors showed more movement, at least 4 figures now, surrounding the house with professional coordination. Richard felt helpless watching the enemy, close in while they huddled in a basement like prey. "We can't just wait here," he said. "We're not." Danielle's smile was sharp. "They made one mistake." "What?" "They assumed they were hunting civilians." The call came at 3 a.m., Claire's terrified voice whispering through static. "They have me. They said to tell you that all the protection in the world can't stop someone on the inside." As the line went dead, Richard and Danielle realized their worst nightmare. The threat had never been external. Trust, once broken, cuts deeper than any blade, especially when the betrayer wore a badge and promised to serve and protect. The warehouse district stretched along the Chattahoochee River like industrial graveyards, rusted metal and broken windows creating perfect hiding spots for predators who understood that money couldn't buy safety. Only the illusion of it. Richard's hands shook as he listened to the recorded message again, Claire's frightened voice cutting through him like shattered glass. They said to tell you that all the protection in the world can't stop someone on the inside. Inside, someone Claire trusted, someone who had access to their security protocols, their safe house locations, their most private information. How long ago was this sent? Danielle asked, her professional calm barely masking the fury in her eyes. 20 minutes. Richard's voice was hollow. While we were driving here. They sat in his car outside the abandoned textile factory where the kidnappers had demanded the meeting, but Danielle's focus was on her laptop screen, fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed security footage from the safe house. There, she said, pointing to a timestamp. See how the power cut happened exactly 30 seconds after my handler called with updated instructions? Someone was listening to our communications. Agent Martinez? No, someone with access to federal monitoring equipment. Her expression hardened. Someone who knew exactly when we'd be distracted. Richard studied the warehouse through his windshield. No lights, no visible movement. But somewhere inside, his daughter was waiting for rescue, probably terrified and confused about why the adults she trusted had failed to protect her. I should have seen it, he said. The pattern, the way every security measure we implemented seemed to fail at exactly the wrong moment. You're not trained for this kind of betrayal. Danielle's voice was gentle. But I am. She pulled up another screen. Personnel files for everyone with access to their security information. Richard's head of security, James Morrison, appeared first. 15 years of faithful service, glowing recommendations, background checks that showed nothing suspicious. Morrison, Richard said, impossible. I've trusted him with Claire's safety since she was 10 years old, which makes him perfect. Danielle's fingers continued typing. Trust is the best camouflage. More files appeared. Other security personnel, household staff, even Richard's personal assistant. But Danielle kept returning to Morrison's profile, studying details that seemed insignificant. His financial records show regular deposits that don't match his salary, she said finally. Small amounts, but consistent. For the past 18 months. 18 months. Right around the time the suspicious incident started. The elevator malfunction, the gas leak in the parking garage, the food poisoning that had affected only Richard and Claire. He's been trying to kill us for over a year, Richard realized. Not kill. Control. Danielle's analysis was cold and precise. Every incident was designed to make you more dependent on security, more willing to accept restrictions on your freedom. Someone wanted you isolated and predictable. But why? Before Danielle could answer, Richard's phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Come inside. Alone. Your daughter's time is running out. Danielle studied the message, then looked at the warehouse. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. But Claire's in there. Richard, if you walk in there alone, you're both dead. He met her eyes, seeing his own desperation reflected in her face. So what do you suggest? Her smile was predatory. We give them what they expect, and then we give them something they don't. 20 minutes later, Richard approached the warehouse entrance with his hands visible and empty, every inch the concerned father willing to negotiate for his daughter's life. Behind him, Danielle had vanished into the shadows like she'd never existed. The warehouse interior was a maze of rusted machinery and collapsed catwalks, perfect for ambush. Richard's footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as he followed the sound of voices deeper into the building. He found them in what had once been the main production floor. Claire sitting in a metal chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back, but her eyes alert and angry rather than frightened. Morrison stood behind her, no longer the loyal employee, but someone Richard didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Cole," Morrison said. "Thank you for coming. Let her go, James. Whatever this is about, it's between us. Actually, it's about your wife." Morrison's smile was ugly. Elena was supposed to deliver certain financial information before she died, so inconveniently. Information that would have made both of us very wealthy. Richard felt pieces clicking into place. You were working with Elena. Working for Elena. She hired me to gradually compromise your security, make you more dependent on protection services. The plan was to slowly drain your accounts while keeping you distracted by manufactured threats. But she died. Accident. Very tragic. Morrison's tone suggested it hadn't been accidental. Unfortunately, she took the access codes with her. Codes that I need to complete our arrangement with some very impatient international clients. Claire's voice cut through the warehouse air, steady despite her circumstances. Dad, there are 3 other men. 1 on the catwalk above you, 2 by the loading dock. Morrison backhanded her casually, and Richard saw red. He started forward, but stopped when Morrison pressed a gun to Claire's temple. Your daughter is remarkably observant, Morrison said. Just like her father. It's going to be a shame to lose both of you. The codes died with Elena, Richard said. I can't give you something I don't have. Oh, but you can. Morrison pulled out a tablet, showing bank account information. You see, I've had 18 months to study your financial habits. I know which accounts Elena had access to, which passwords she might have used. All I need is your biometric authorization to access the master controls. Richard understood now. This wasn't just about stealing money. It was about framing him for the theft. With the biometric data, Morrison could make it look like Richard had been the one moving funds to criminal organizations. And if I refuse, then Claire dies, and I find another way to access the accounts. But this way is cleaner. Above them, Richard heard the faint sound of metal against metal. Danielle, moving through the catwalks like a hunting cat. He needed to buy her time. Elena never told me about any clients, he said. What kind of people are we talking about? Morrison was happy to gloat. Arms dealers, mostly. Some human trafficking operations that needed financial laundering services. Very lucrative, but they don't appreciate being kept waiting. You're talking about funding terrorism. I'm talking about retirement. Morrison's finger moved to the tablet's biometric scanner. Your thumbprint, Mr. Cole. Now, Dad, don't, Claire said quietly. Whatever happens to me, don't give them what they want. Richard looked at his daughter, 15 years old, tied to a chair, facing death with more courage than most adults could muster. Elena's daughter, but also his. Strong and smart, and absolutely fearless. I'm proud of you, he told her. I know, she smiled. Now, duck. Richard dropped to the warehouse floor as chaos erupted around him. Danielle appeared from above like an avenging angel, rappelling down a rope with deadly precision. Her first shot took out the sniper on the catwalk before he could react. Her second shot shattered Morrison's gun hand, sending his weapon spinning across the concrete. The men by the loading dock opened fire, but Danielle was already moving, using the warehouse machinery as cover while she systematically eliminated each threat. Richard had seen action movies, but watching the real thing was completely different, efficient, brutal, and over in less than 30 seconds. When the shooting stopped, Morrison was on the ground, clutching his wounded hand, while Danielle kept her weapon trained on him. Richard rushed to Claire, cutting her restraints with a knife Danielle tossed him. Are you hurt? He asked, checking her for injuries. Just my pride, Claire said. I can't believe I trusted Mr. Morrison for so long. That makes 2 of us. Danielle approached Morrison, who was trying to stop the bleeding from his hand. James Morrison, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, and about a dozen federal firearms violations. You can't prove anything, Morrison gasped. It's my word against. Danielle held up her phone, showing a recording app that had been running throughout the confrontation. Actually, it's your confession against your confession. As sirens approached in the distance, Richard felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. For 18 months, he'd trusted his family's safety to a man who'd been systematically trying to destroy them. But he'd also found someone willing to risk everything to protect what mattered most to him. How did you know? He asked Danielle as they waited for the police. I didn't know, but I suspected. She glanced at Claire, who was giving a statement to one of the arriving officers. Trust is essential, but verification is survival. Richard looked at Morrison, who was being loaded into an ambulance under police guard. He could have killed us at any time, but he didn't. Because dead billionaires can't authorize financial transfers. Danielle's analysis was brutally practical. He needed you alive until he got what he wanted. And now we find out who he was working for. Her smile was sharp. Because men like Morrison don't operate alone. As they watched the ambulance disappear into Atlanta traffic, Richard realized their ordeal was far from over. Morrison had been the inside man, but someone else had been pulling the strings. Someone who still wanted what Elena had hidden. And until they found that person, his family would never be truly safe. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Richard felt like they had a fighting chance. Because he wasn't just a wealthy man trying to buy protection anymore. He was part of a team. Some secrets are buried so deep that digging them up changes everything you thought you knew about the person sleeping beside you. The military personnel file lay spread across his desk like an autopsy report, redacted sections hiding wounds that never fully healed. Outside his office windows, Atlanta's skyline gleamed with prosperity built on foundations of concrete and compromise, not so different from the choices that shaped the woman he thought he knew. Richard stared at the classified documents that had arrived by Federal Courier that morning, each page stamped with warnings about unauthorized disclosure. Agent Martinez had been reluctant to share them, but Morrison's arrest had changed the game. Now Richard needed to understand exactly who he'd been trusting with his family's lives. Operation Nightfall. The name appeared throughout Danielle's military record, always followed by heavy redaction. But enough details remained to paint a picture that made his stomach clench with dread. Civilian casualties. Friendly fire incident. Honorable discharge under questionable circumstances. The woman who'd saved his daughter, who'd kissed him with desperate passion in his office, who'd become essential to his breathing. She had ghosts that made his own pale in comparison. Burning the midnight oil again, Richard looked up to find Danielle in his office doorway, still in tactical clothing from her meeting with federal investigators. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd finally been able to tell the complete truth about complicated events. "How did the debriefing go?" he asked, closing the file folder. "Long, thorough. They're convinced Morrison was just the tip of the iceberg." She approached his desk, then stopped when she saw the military documents. Her face went carefully blank. "So you know," she said quietly, "I know what's in this file. I don't know what really happened." Danielle was quiet for a long moment, studying his expression like she was calculating odds of survival. Finally, she settled into the chair across from his desk, no longer the confident protector, but someone preparing for judgment. "Syria, 2018, she began. Joint operation with local forces to extract American hostages from a compound controlled by arms dealers. Intelligence said the building was a weapons depot with minimal civilian presence." Richard waited, sensing this was a story that couldn't be rushed. Intelligence was wrong. "When we breached the compound, we found families. Children sleeping in the basement because it was the coolest place during summer heat." Her voice was steady, but Richard saw her hands trembling slightly. "The local commander gave the order to proceed anyway. Said the hostages took priority over collateral damage." "What did you do?" "I refused the order." Directly contradicted a superior officer in the middle of combat operations. Her laugh was bitter. "My squad followed my lead instead of his. We evacuated the civilians first, secured the hostages second." "That sounds like the right choice." "It was the right choice, but it wasn't the military choice." Danielle met his eyes. "The delay allowed some of the weapons dealers to escape. Those weapons ended up killing American soldiers in other operations. So tell me, Richard was saving 37 Syrian civilians worth the deaths of 12 Americans 6 months later." The question hung between them like a blade. Richard could see why it haunted her, why she carried the weight of that decision for years. "You can't know that those weapons would have been stopped if—" "I can't know anything for certain. That's the problem." She leaned forward, intensity burning in her expression. "Every choice has consequences. Every life saved costs other lives. The military understands this. I didn't. So they discharged you. They offer me a choice. Court-martial for disobeying orders during combat, or honorable discharge with sealed records. I took the discharge. Richard processed this information, trying to reconcile the woman he'd fallen in love with and the soldier who'd made an impossible choice under fire. No regrets. About saving those families? Never. Her voice was firm. About the soldiers who died later because of weapons I could have prevented from reaching the black market? Every day, she stood, pacing to his windows to look out at the city lights. You want to know who I really am, Richard? I'm someone who chose conscience over duty, and people died because of it. I'm someone who kills efficiently when necessary, but agonizes over every civilian casualty. I'm someone who spent 5 years trying to balance the scales. Is that why you became a private security contractor? I became a contractor because the military didn't want someone who questioned orders. But I chose to work protection details because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because protecting innocent people felt like penance. Richard stood, moving to join her at the windows. The city spread below them like a circuit board, millions of lights representing lives that continued despite the darkness that sometimes surrounded them. Claire adores you, he said. She feels safer with you than with an entire security team. Claire doesn't know what I've done. She knows what you've done for her. Richard turned to face Danielle directly. She knows you risked everything to keep her safe. She knows you treat her like she matters, not like she's a burden or a target. And when she learns the truth about Syria, about the people who died because I hesitated, Richard was quiet for a moment, thinking about his daughter's surprisingly mature understanding of moral complexity. She'll ask if you had to make the same choice again. Would you make it differently? No, Danielle answered without hesitation. I'd save those families every time. Then she'll respect you for knowing the difference between right and legal. Danielle studied his face, searching for signs of judgment or rejection. Instead, she found something that made her breath catch. You're not afraid of me, she said, wonder in her voice. I'm terrified of you. Richard's honesty was brutal. You could disappear tomorrow, and I'd never find you. You could decide I'm not worth the complications and walk away. You could break my heart without even trying. I'm unafraid of what I've done, what I'm capable of. Richard stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her subtle perfume mixed with gun, oil, and determination. I've seen what you're capable of when someone threatens Claire. I've seen your precision, your training, your willingness to kill, to protect innocent people. And I've never felt safer in my life. He reached up to touch her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The woman who saved Syrian families is the same woman who saved my daughter. The soldier who questioned immoral orders is the same person who questions every security decision to make sure it's right, not just efficient. Danielle leaned into his touch, eyes closing as if his acceptance was oxygen and she'd been holding her breath for years. I'm not the hero you think I am, she whispered. Then be the woman I love, he replied, and claimed her mouth with fierce certainty. The kiss was desperate, charged with months of unspoken truths and fears. She responded with matching intensity, hands fisting in his shirt as she pulled him closer. Against his office windows, with Atlanta's lights painting them in gold and shadow, they found each other beyond the complications of duty and protection. Richard, she breathed against his lips, but he silenced her with another kiss. His hands found the buttons of her tactical shirt, fingers working with urgent need while her mouth traced fire along his throat. She pushed him back against his desk, papers scattering as she climbed up to straddle him, her legs wrapping around his waist like she was claiming territory. Here, she asked, glancing toward the office door. Here, he confirmed, hands sliding up her thighs. Now, she laughed, the sound like pure joy from someone who'd forgotten how to feel safe until she learned to trust completely. Her fingers made quick work of his belt while he mapped the muscles of her back through thin fabric, memorizing the strength that had protected everything he valued. I love you, he said against her collarbone, tasting salt and determination. I love you too, she replied, and proved it with movements that spoke of trust and need and the fierce desire to claim each other completely. Later, as they straightened their clothes and tried to look professional again, Richard felt something fundamental had shifted between them. Not just physical satisfaction, but emotional resolution. The secrets were finally in the open, examined and accepted. What happens now? Danielle asked, checking her reflection in the dark windows. Now we find out who Morrison was really working for. Richard's voice carried new determination. Because this isn't over. Agreed. But Richard? She paused, meeting his eyes in the glass reflection. What we just shared, what you just accepted about my past, that can't change based on what we discover next. It won't. Promise me. Because I have a feeling the worst revelations are still coming. Before Richard could respond, his secure phone rang. The caller ID showed Agent Martinez. We have a problem, came her voice without preamble. Morrison's been killed in federal custody. Professional job, made to look like suicide. Richard felt ice form in his chest. When? 20 minutes ago. But that's not the worst part. Martinez paused. Before he died, he managed to pass a message to his lawyer. For words, check Elena's insurance policy. The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at the phone while his world shifted again. Elena's insurance policy had paid out $5 million after her death. He donated most of it to charity, keeping only enough to fund Claire's education. What is it? Danielle asked, reading his expression. Elena. Morrison's final message was about Elena's insurance policy. Danielle was already moving to his computer, fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed financial databases with skills that went far beyond basic contractor training. Richard, she said after several minutes of typing. Elena's death was investigated by the insurance company before they paid out. Standard procedure for policies over $1 million. I remember. It took months to process. The investigating agent was... Her typing stopped. James Morrison. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Morrison hadn't just been Elena's accomplice. He'd been her killer. And the insurance investigation had been his cover for ensuring no one looked too closely at the circumstances of her death. He murdered my wife, Richard said, the words feeling strange in his mouth, to keep her from exposing their criminal partnership. And now he's dead too, Danielle added grimly, which means whoever hired them both is cleaning up loose ends. Richard's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. Unknown number, but the words made his blood freeze. You think this is over? I was just the middleman, Richard. The person who really wants her family dead is someone you see every day, someone Claire loves, someone you'd never suspect. The investigation was over, but the real danger was just beginning. When federal agents ask you to betray the woman you love to save your country, the choice reveals who you really are and what you're willing to sacrifice for truth. The federal building stood like a concrete monument to bureaucratic power, its sterile corridors and fluorescent lighting designed to intimidate civilians into compliance. But as Richard walked between suited agents, he carried something they couldn't confiscate, absolute certainty about where his loyalty belonged. Agent Martinez led him to a conference room where 3 other agents waited, their faces wearing expressions of professional concern mixed with barely concealed suspicion. On the table between them lay photographs, documents, and surveillance equipment that suggested this meeting had been planned long before Morrison's death. Mr. Cole, thank you for coming, said Agent Thompson, a severe woman who introduced herself as Martinez's supervisor. I'm sure you're wondering why we've asked to meet with you separately from Ms. Brooks. Richard settled into the offered chair, keeping his expression neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. I assumed it was about Morrison's murder. Partially. Thompson opened a file folder, revealing photographs of Danielle taken from various angles over the past several weeks. But mostly it's about your relationship with Danielle Brooks and some concerning activities we've discovered. The photos showed Danielle in locations Richard didn't recognize, meeting with men in expensive suits, exchanging packages with individuals who looked like they belonged in international crime documentaries, entering buildings that had the sterile appearance of government facilities. These were taken over the past month, Agent Martinez explained, while Ms. Brooks was supposedly focused solely on protecting your family. Richard studied the images, searching for context that might explain their innocent nature. But even to his untrained eye, they looked damaging. What are you suggesting? He asked. "We're not suggesting anything," Thompson replied. "We're stating facts. Danielle Brooks has been conducting unauthorized meetings with individuals connected to international arms dealing, money laundering, and human trafficking operations. The same operations Elena was involved with," Martinez added. "The same ones Morrison was trying to access through your financial accounts." Richard felt like he was standing on quicksand, every attempt to find solid ground only making him sink deeper. "There has to be an explanation." "There is." Thompson's smile was cold. "Ms. Brooks isn't just a security contractor, Mr. Cole. She's a federal agent working undercover to infiltrate the same criminal network that killed your wife." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Everything he thought he knew about Danielle, about their relationship, about the authenticity of her feelings, all of it suddenly questionable. "She's been lying to me," he said, more statement than question. "She's been doing her job," Martinez corrected. "The question is whether she's been doing only her job or if she's been compromised by personal feelings." Thompson leaned forward, her expression intense. "Mr. Cole, we believe Ms. Brooks has developed genuine feelings for you and your daughter. That's not necessarily a problem, but becomes one when those feelings interfere with her mission objectives." "What mission objectives?" "The criminal network Elena was connected to is still active, still dangerous, still moving money and weapons through channels that threaten national security." Thompson's voice carried urgency. "Ms. Brooks was placed in your life to use your family as bait, to draw out the remaining players so we could capture them." Richard's world tilted sideways. "Bait? The threats against your family were real, but we allowed them to continue because they were drawing out bigger fish. Morrison was small time. We needed him alive to lead us to his handlers. But now he's dead because someone realized we were getting close. Someone who knew about the investigation, knew about Ms. Brooks' real identity." Martinez's expression was grim. "We think that someone is Ms. Brooks herself." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Richard struggled to process the implications that the woman he loved, the woman who'd risked everything to save Claire, might be a double agent working for the people who'd killed Elena. "You're wrong," he said finally. "Are we?" Thompson slid another photograph across the table. This one showed Danielle entering a warehouse at night, alone, carrying what looked like a briefcase. This was taken 2 nights ago, 6 hours after Morrison's death. She met with Viktor Kozlov, a Russian arms dealer we've been tracking for 3 years. Richard stared at the photo, searching for alternative explanations that didn't involve betrayal. Maybe she was investigating, without backup, without authorization, without informing her handlers. Thompson's voice was sharp. "Mr. Cole, either Ms. Brooks has gone rogue, or she's been working for the other side all along. What do you want from me?" Martinez answered. "We want you to help us find out which one it is. And if she's been compromised, we want you to help us stop her." The request hit Richard like ice water. They were asking him to spy on the woman he loved, to betray someone who'd proven her loyalty through actions rather than words. "She saved my daughter's life. Did she? Or did she orchestrate the entire situation to gain your trust?" Thompson's questions were surgical, designed to cut through emotional attachments and expose logical doubts. "Think about it, Mr. Cole. How convenient that she was in exactly the right place at the right time to intervene. How convenient that every threat against your family required you to depend more heavily on her protection." Richard wanted to dismiss their suspicions as paranoid nonsense, but he couldn't ignore the pattern they were describing. The timing, the escalation, the way Danielle had seemed to anticipate threats before they materialized. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We're a wire. Record her conversations. Find out who she's really working for and what she's planning next." Martinez's voice carried false sympathy. "I know it's difficult, but if she's innocent, this will prove it. If she's not, then you'll arrest her. If she's not, then she's been using your daughter as leverage in a game that could get millions of people killed." Thompson's bluntness was brutal but effective. "How much is your personal happiness worth against that possibility?" Richard closed his eyes, trying to quiet the chaos in his head long enough to think clearly. Every instinct screamed that they were wrong about Danielle. but every logical argument supported their suspicions. I need time to consider this. Time we don't have. Thompson checked her watch. Intelligence suggests something big is happening within the next 48 hours. If Ms. Brooks is involved, we need to know now. And if I refuse, then we'll arrest her anyway, based on what we already have. But without your cooperation, we might not be able to prevent whatever she's planning. The choice was brutal in its simplicity: betray the woman he loved to potentially save her from herself, or protect her privacy and risk enabling something catastrophic. There's one more thing, Martinez said quietly. Ms. Brooks requested a meeting with you tonight. Private location, no security backup. If she's planning to run, or if she's planning something worse, this might be your only chance to find out. Richard looked at the photographs again, studying Danielle's face in each image. She looked focused, determined, professional, but also secretive in ways that chilled him. Where's the meeting? The old opera house where you confronted Elena. Midnight. Martinez's expression was carefully neutral. Interesting choice of venue, don't you think? It was the same location where they'd faced down one betrayal, now potentially the setting for another. Richard made his decision. Give me the wire. As the agents prepared their surveillance equipment, Richard tried to convince himself he was doing the right thing. If Danielle was innocent, this would clear her name. If she wasn't, he couldn't finish that thought. 3 hours later, Richard stood outside the abandoned opera house, federal agents positioned in vehicles around the perimeter, while sophisticated recording equipment captured every sound. Inside his jacket, the wire felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. At exactly midnight, Danielle appeared from the shadows like she'd materialized from darkness itself. She wore black tactical clothing and moved with predatory grace. But her expression was soft when she saw him. "Thank you for coming," she said, approaching with hands visible and empty. "Why here?" he asked, hyper-aware of the recording device against his chest. "Because this is where we learned that people we trust can become people we fear." Her smile was sad. "And I need you to hear something that might change how you feel about me." Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. "What?" Danielle looked directly into his eyes, her expression carrying weight that suggested she was about to confess something that would alter everything between them. "I know about the federal agents, Richard. I know they've been asking you to spy on me." The wire suddenly felt like it was burning against his skin. When Danielle opened the door to find Richard standing there with federal agents behind him, her hand instinctively moved toward the gun at her back. But then she saw his eyes and the message they carried. "I'm with you, whatever comes next." The agents had expected betrayal. They got war. They wanted a billionaire's cooperation to catch a killer. Instead, they created a partnership that would hunt monsters by their own rules. The command center they built in Richard's penthouse looked like something from a spy thriller. Multiple monitors displaying financial networks and military databases, while satellite maps tracked targets across 3 continents. But this wasn't fiction. This was what happened when unlimited resources met unlimited determination. The wire was a test, Danielle explained, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as data streamed across the screens. "I needed to know if you'd trust me enough to refuse their request, or if you'd choose their version of truth over what you'd seen with your own eyes." Richard sat beside her, still processing the revelation that she'd known about the federal meeting all along. "How did you know?" "Because Agent Martinez isn't my handler. She's my target." Danielle pulled up a file that made Richard's blood run cold. "Sarah Martinez has been feeding information to criminal networks for 3 years. She's the reason Morrison knew about our security protocols. She's the reason Elena was killed before she could expose the full scope of the operation." The evidence was overwhelming: bank transfers, encrypted communications, meeting logs that painted a picture of systematic betrayal at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "The other agents don't know?" Richard asked. "Some suspect. Others are part of it." Danielle's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been fighting a war with no clear enemies or allies. "That's why I couldn't work through official channels. That's why I needed someone with resources and motivation to help me expose the truth." Richard studied the data flowing across the screens, beginning to understand the scope of what they were facing. Elena wasn't just stealing money for personal gain. She was stealing money to fund operations that Martinez was protecting from investigation. Arms deals, human trafficking, political assassinations, all of it flowing through financial networks that your wife helped establish. The irony was brutal. Elena's betrayal of their marriage had been the least of her crimes. Dad, Claire's voice came from the penthouse elevator as she arrived home from school. What's with all the computer stuff? Richard exchanged glances with Danielle. They'd agreed to keep Claire informed but protected, involved but not endangered. Research project, Danielle said smoothly. Want to help? Claire's eyes lit up with curiosity as she approached the command center. What kind of research? The kind that stops bad people from hurting innocent families, Richard said. The kind that requires someone with exceptional computer skills. Over the next hour, Claire proved she'd inherited more than just her father's determination. Her natural ability with technology, combined with teenage intuition about social media patterns, uncovered connections that had escaped both Danielle's military training and Richard's business analysis. Look at this, Claire said, pointing to a social media profile she discovered. Agent Martinez's daughter posted photos from a vacation in Switzerland last month. But according to her official salary, she couldn't afford a trip like that. Danielle leaned over Claire's shoulder, studying the images with professional interest. What else can you find about the family's spending patterns? Claire's fingers flew across the keyboard with youthful enthusiasm. Private school tuition paid in cash. New car purchased without financing. Credit card bills that show expensive restaurants and designer shopping, but no corresponding income increases. Good work, Richard said, pride mixing with concern about involving his daughter in something so dangerous. This is actually fun, Claire admitted. Like solving puzzles where the pieces fight back. Danielle's laugh was genuine. That's exactly what it is. As afternoon turned to evening, their makeshift investigation team uncovered layer after layer of corruption that reached into multiple government agencies, international banks, and criminal organizations spanning 4 continents. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became that Martinez was just one part of a much larger machine. We need to take this to someone we can trust, Richard said. Like who? Danielle's question was sharp. Martinez fooled federal investigators for 3 years. She has references, recommendations, a spotless service record. Who's going to believe that she's been playing both sides? Claire looked up from her computer screen. What if we don't try to convince anyone? What if we just make it impossible for them to operate? Both adults turned to stare at the 15-year-old who just suggested something neither of them had considered. Explain, Danielle said. You've been thinking like cops, Claire said, her teenage confidence making her sound older than her years. But bad guys don't get stopped by arrest warrants if the cops are corrupt. They get stopped by having their money frozen, their communications exposed, their operations shut down. Richard felt something click into place. Corporate warfare instead of law enforcement. Exactly. Dad, you know how to destroy business operations. You know how to make companies fail, how to cut off funding, how to expose scandals that ruin careers. Claire's excitement was infectious. And Danielle knows where their operations are, who their contacts are, how their security works. Danielle was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. It would be completely illegal. So is murder, Claire pointed out. And human trafficking, Richard added. And federal corruption, Danielle finished. They looked at each other, 3 people who'd been pushed too far by a system that protected criminals while endangering innocents. The decision made itself. Where do we start? Richard asked. Danielle's smile was predatory. With Victor Kozlov, the arms dealer Martinez thinks I've been working with. Have you been working with him? I've been pretending to work with him while documenting every transaction, every contact, every illegal shipment. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, bringing up files that represented months of undercover work. He trusts me enough to give me access to his financial networks. Richard understood immediately. Access that would allow us to drain his accounts, and expose his client list, and reveal his shipping routes, and identify every corrupt official he's been bribing. Danielle's plan was elegant in its simplicity. We don't just stop him. We stop everyone he's connected to. Claire is practically bouncing with excitement. This is so much better than homework. This is homework, Richard corrected. Advanced studies in justice. Over the next 6 hours, they worked together to plan what amounted to a coordinated attack on an international criminal network. Richard's business expertise identified financial vulnerabilities. Danielle's military training mapped operational weaknesses. Claire's technological intuition found digital backdoors that neither adult had considered. Maps and documents scattered across the conference table as their planning session intensified. Richard found himself standing close behind Danielle as she explained network security protocols, close enough to smell her subtle perfume mixed with the adrenaline of shared purpose. "We're good at this," she murmured, glancing back at him with eyes that held appreciation for more than just his strategic contributions. "Which part?" he asked, his voice lower than necessary, given Claire's presence across the room. "All of it," she replied, and the promise in her voice made his pulse quicken. Claire cleared her throat dramatically. "Should I leave you two alone for a minute?" "No," both adults said simultaneously, but Richard didn't step away from Danielle's chair. By midnight, they had a plan that would simultaneously expose Martinez's corruption, destroy Kozlov's operations, and protect innocent people from becoming collateral damage. It was ambitious, illegal, and absolutely necessary. "There's one problem," Danielle said as they reviewed their final strategy. "Once we start this, there's no going back. Every intelligence agency in the world will be looking for us." "Good thing you make a good team," Richard replied. Claire looked up from the computer where she'd been creating untraceable communication protocols. "Speaking of teams, there's something you both should see." The image she found made them all freeze. A photograph buried deep in encrypted files, showing a meeting between Martinez, Kozlov, and a third person whose face was clearly visible despite the shadows. Elena Cole, supposedly dead for 5 years, shaking hands with arms dealers in what looked like a recent photograph. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. when Claire's program cracked the encrypted files, locations, dates, and photographs that proved everything Danielle had suspected. But the final image on screen made them all freeze. Richard's supposedly dead wife, very much alive, standing beside the war criminal they'd been hunting. Death certificates lie, but photographs don't, and the woman in the classified file wore the face of the wife Richard had mourned for 5 years. The photograph stared back at them from the computer screen with accusatory clarity. Elena Cole, supposedly buried in Oakwood Cemetery 5 years ago, shaking hands with arms dealers in a Syrian safe house just 6 months prior. Death, it seemed, had been simply another business transaction. Richard's hands trembled as he reached for the monitor, as if touching the screen might reveal the image as some cruel digital manipulation. But the metadata was clear: timestamps, location coordinates, even facial recognition software confirming what his eyes refused to believe. "Dad," Claire's voice was small, younger than her 15 years. "Is that really Mom?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Richard looked at his daughter, seeing Elena's eyes staring back at him, and felt something break inside his chest. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's your mother." Claire's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, hope, betrayal, and finally a cold anger that reminded Richard uncomfortably of Elena herself. "She let us think she was dead," Claire said, her voice steady despite the tears starting to form. "She let me cry at her funeral. She let me miss her for 5 years." Danielle moved to stand beside Claire's chair, her hand resting gently on the teenager's shoulder. The gesture was protective, maternal in a way that Elena had never quite managed, even when she'd been alive. "We don't know the circumstances," Danielle said carefully. "There might be reasons. What reason justifies letting your daughter think you're dead?" Claire's anger was sharp and clean, cutting through any excuse before it could be offered. Richard studied the photograph, looking for clues about Elena's current situation. She appeared healthy, well-dressed, confident, not like someone who'd been coerced or threatened into faking her death. "She chose this," he realized. "She chose to abandon us." The weight of that truth settled over the penthouse like a toxic cloud. Elena hadn't died in a tragic accident. She'd orchestrated her own disappearance to escape the consequences of her criminal activities. How long do you think she's been working with them? Danielle asked, pulling up additional files. Longer than we know. Richard's business mind was already working through the implications. The charity foundation, the international investments, her access to our banking information. She was positioning herself to disappear long before the car accident. Claire was typing furiously, tears streaming down her face as she searched through financial databases with single-minded determination. Here, she said, voice thick with emotion. Insurance payout of $5 million. Paid to a trust fund, supposedly for my education. But you never received that money, Richard said, because the trust fund was controlled by Elena herself, using a false identity. Claire's laugh was bitter beyond her years. She stole her own death benefits. Danielle was quiet, studying additional photographs that showed Elena at various locations over the past 5 years. Meetings in expensive hotels, handshakes with men who looked like they belonged on international wanted lists, document exchanges that suggested ongoing criminal enterprise. She's not just alive, Danielle said finally. She's been building an empire. More files revealed the scope of Elena's post-death activities. Arms dealing networks across Eastern Europe. Money laundering operations through Swiss banks. Human trafficking routes that move people like inventory across international borders. All of this was funded with money she stole from our family, Richard realized. Money I thought was going to legitimate charities. Claire suddenly stopped typing, her face going pale as she stared at something on her screen. What is it? Danielle asked. She's been watching us. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. Look, the surveillance photos showed Richard and Claire at various times over the past year, leaving their apartment building, attending Claire's school events, even eating at restaurants. All taken from a distance, all showing intimate family moments that someone had been documenting without their knowledge. She's been keeping track of our lives, Richard said, horror mixing with rage. But not participating in them, Danielle pointed out. She's been watching like we're characters in a television show she finds mildly interesting. Claire stood abruptly, pacing to the windows that overlooked Atlanta's glittering skyline. Do you think she knows about us? About you and Dad? Danielle exchanged glances with Richard. It's possible. She knows, Claire said with certainty. She knows everything about our lives because she's been watching them like a movie, but she doesn't care about us as people anymore. The insight was devastating in its accuracy. Elena had been monitoring her family's emotional healing, their growing closeness with Danielle, their recovery from grief, all without feeling compelled to reveal herself or return to their lives. Richard's secure phone rang, interrupting their grim discoveries. Unknown number. Answer it, Danielle said grimly. We need to know what we're dealing with. Richard activated the speaker function. Elena's voice filled the penthouse like poison gas. Hello, darling, she said, the endearment mocking in its casual cruelty. I hear you've been looking for me. Claire made it sound like she'd been physically struck. Richard's hand moved protectively toward his daughter while Danielle positioned herself between the phone and potential threats. Elena, Richard said, his voice carefully controlled. We thought you were dead. Her laugh was light, amused. Death is such a limiting concept, don't you think? I prefer to think of it as a career change. A career change that involved abandoning your daughter. Abandoning implies I had a choice. I had debts, Richard. Debts that required certain sacrifices. Claire stepped forward, her young voice carrying more strength than Richard had expected. What about your debt to me? What about 5 years of thinking my mother was dead? Silence stretched across the phone line. When Elena spoke again, her voice had lost its casual amusement. Claire, my God, you sound so grown up. I'm grown up. I had to be. People who lose their mothers at 10 years old don't get to stay children very long. Richard felt pride mixing with heartbreak as he listened to his daughter confront the woman who'd shaped her life through absence. I did what I had to do to protect you, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. You did what you wanted to do, Claire replied. and now you get to live with the consequences. Claire, you don't understand the complexity. I understand that you chose money over family. I understand that you let Dad blame himself for your death. I understand that you watched us grieve while you build a new life with criminals and murderers. Elena's voice turned cold. You know nothing about what I've built. I know enough. Danielle interjected, her tone professional and deadly. I know about your partnership with Martinez. I know about your financial networks. I know about the people who've died because of weapons you've helped smuggle. Ah, the famous Danielle Brooks. Richard's little protector. Elena's voice carried venom now. Tell me, dear, does he know about your real military record? About the civilians you killed in Syria? Richard felt Danielle tense beside him, but her voice remained steady. He knows everything that matters. Does he? How refreshing. Honesty is so rare in my line of work. Claire stepped closer to the phone. What do you want, Mom? I want to see you. Both of you. One last meeting before certain business arrangements require my complete attention. Meaning what? Richard asked. Meaning there are people who object to my recent success. People who might target my family to send a message. Elena's voice carried false concern. I need to ensure your continued safety. Our safety. Richard's anger finally broke through his control. You're the reason we've been in danger. And now I'm the only thing keeping you alive. Meet me tomorrow night. The old opera house. Just the three of us. Claire and Richard exchanged glances, both thinking of the last confrontation at that location. Why should we trust you? Danielle asked. Because if you don't come, Claire dies for real this time. Elena's voice was matter of fact. I've spent 5 years building relationships with very dangerous people, dear. People who understand that family loyalty sometimes requires difficult choices. The line went dead, leaving them staring at the silent phone. Claire was the first to speak. She's going to try to kill us. Probably, Richard agreed. Good, his daughter said, her voice carrying steel that reminded him of both Elena and Danielle. Because I have some things I want to say to her first. Elena's voice came through the secured phone line like a ghost demanding recognition. Hello, darling. I hear you've been looking for me. Let's meet tomorrow, just the three of us. Richard, me, and your little bodyguard. If you don't come alone, Claire dies for real this time. Some ghosts demand to be laid to rest permanently. But first, they insist on taking everyone they once claimed to love down with them. The Paramount Opera House had been Atlanta's crown jewel once, but decades of neglect left it hollow and haunting. Velvet seats gathering dust, while crystal chandeliers hung like broken promises above a stage where tragedy was about to play its final act. Richard approached the abandoned building with Danielle at his side, both of them wearing tactical gear that spoke of serious preparation for what was to come. Behind them, Claire followed despite their attempts to leave her in safety. She'd simply pointed out that Elena's threats made her a target anywhere, so she might as well be a target who could defend herself. Motion sensors showed 3 heat signatures inside, Danielle reported, checking the military-grade equipment she'd somehow acquired in the 12 hours since Elena's call. But that doesn't account for anyone with thermal shielding, or anyone who arrived before we started monitoring. Richard added, his businessman's instinct for detail serving him well in this deadlier context. Claire clutched the tablet containing all their evidence against Elena's criminal network. Bank records, photographs, communication logs that would destroy her mother's empire even if they didn't survive the night. You sure you want to do this? Richard asked his daughter one last time. She's been dead to me for 5 years, Claire replied. Tonight just makes it official. They entered through the stage door, footsteps echoing in the cavernous space like gunshots. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows, turning the ornate architecture into something from a nightmare. Elena waited center stage, poised and elegant in designer clothing that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. She looked exactly as Richard remembered, except for the eyes. They held a coldness that hadn't been there during their marriage. Welcome to my farewell performance, she said, her voice carrying easily through the empty theater. 2 men emerged from the wings, professional killers by the look of them, armed and positioned to cover all exits. But Danielle's training had prepared her for exactly this scenario. Claire, sweetheart, Elena continued, focusing on her daughter. You look so much like I did at your age. I look like someone whose mother abandoned her, Claire replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Elena's smile faltered slightly. I had no choice. The people I was working with don't accept resignation letters. So you faked your death instead of facing the consequences of your choices, Richard said, moving closer to the stage. I protected you from the consequences of my choices. There's a difference. Danielle stepped forward, her weapon visible but not raised. Protection would have been stopping your criminal activities. What you did was abandon responsibility. And who are you to judge? Elena's voice turned sharp. The soldier who killed innocent families in Syria? The woman who's been lying to my husband about her real identity? I told Richard everything, Danielle said calmly, including the parts I'm not proud of. How noble. And has he told you about the insurance money he kept? About the fact that he could have investigated my death more thoroughly, but chose to accept the payout instead. Richard felt heat rise in his chest. I donated that money to charity. Most of it, but not all, and not immediately. Elena's smile was cruel. We all make compromises, darling. Mine just happened to involve international law. Claire stepped into the light, tablet clutched against her chest like armor. None of that matters now. What matters is what happens next. What happens next is you come with me, Elena said. All three of you. My business associates have expressed interest in meeting Richard's new family. Business associates who kill people for profit, Danielle observed. Business associates who understand that family loyalty sometimes requires sacrifice, Elena corrected. The same lesson I learned 5 years ago. You didn't sacrifice anything, Claire said, her young voice cutting through Elena's justifications like a blade. You sacrificed us. You chose strangers over your own daughter. Elena's composure cracked slightly. I chose to keep you alive. You chose to keep yourself comfortable. Claire's anger finally broke free. You chose money and adventure over bedtime stories and homework help and being there when I had nightmares about losing you. The emotional confrontation was interrupted by movement in the theater balconies. More armed figures positioning themselves for what was clearly meant to be an execution rather than a negotiation. Danielle's training kicked in immediately. She assessed angles, counted targets, calculated odds that didn't look favorable for survival. Richard, she said quietly, when I move, take Claire and run for the loading dock exit. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. But before anyone could move, Claire did something that surprised everyone. She activated the tablet's broadcast function, streaming live video to social media accounts she prepared earlier. Hi, everyone, she said, speaking directly into camera. I'm Claire Cole, and I'm about to show you what happened to my supposedly dead mother. Elena's face went white. What are you doing? I'm making sure your story gets told correctly, Claire replied. Meet Elena Cole, international arms dealer and deadbeat mom. The live stream was already gaining viewers, hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands as Claire's followers shared the unprecedented broadcast. Turn that off, Elena demanded. No, you want a farewell performance? This is it. Claire turned the camera toward Elena, capturing her surrounded by armed criminals in what was clearly an abandoned building. Everyone say hello to the woman who faked her own death to abandon her family and join the international arms trade. Richard understood his daughter's strategy immediately. Elena's criminal empire depended on secrecy and deniability. Live video broadcast to thousands of witnesses destroyed both. You clever girl, he murmured, pride mixing with terror at Claire's boldness. Elena gestured to her associates, who raised their weapons. But Danielle was already moving, using the distraction of the broadcast to close distance with deadly efficiency. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds. Danielle's military training made her unstoppable in close-quarters combat, while Richard and Claire took cover behind the stage's heavy curtains. When the shooting stopped, Elena's hired killers were down, and she stood alone, facing 3 people who'd seen through every lie she'd built her new life on. 30,000 viewers and climbing, Claire announced, still filming. I think this is going viral. Elena looked at the camera, then at her daughter, then at Richard and Danielle. Whatever she saw in their faces told her that her performance was truly over. "You have no idea what you've done," she said quietly. "The people I work with don't forgive public embarrassment." "Then you'd better disappear again," Richard replied. "Because this time, we're not mourning your death." Elena walked toward the stage exit, moving like someone who'd accepted defeat. At the door, she turned back one last time. "Claire," she said, "I want you to know that I know everything I need to know about you." Claire interrupted, not lowering the camera. "Goodbye, Mom." Elena Cole disappeared into the Atlanta night, leaving behind only the echo of her footsteps and the reality that some betrayals are too complete for forgiveness. But as Richard watched his daughter handle the live stream with professional composure, while Danielle secured the scene with military precision, he realized they'd gained something far more valuable than closure. They'd gained the truth. And sometimes the truth is the only victory that matters. As Elena was led away in federal custody, she called out one final revelation. "You think this is over? I was just the middleman, Richard." The person who really wants her family dead is someone you see every day, someone Claire loves, someone you'd never suspect. The investigation was over, but the real danger was just beginning. Victory tastes bitter when it comes with the knowledge that your greatest enemy was just a puppet, and the puppet master still holds all the strings. The ring gleamed against black velvet in the jewelry store's private viewing room. Princess-cut diamond catching light like captured stars. But the Real treasure sat across from him, discussing security protocols for their wedding with the same intensity she once reserved for combat missions. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's arrest, and the viral live stream that had exposed an international criminal network to global scrutiny. Federal agencies across 4 continents were making arrests based on the evidence Richard, Danielle, and Claire had compiled. But instead of feeling safe, Richard found himself more paranoid than ever. "You're thinking too hard again," Danielle observed, watching him study the engagement ring he'd chosen for her. "It's beautiful, Richard. More than I ever imagined having. It's not the ring I'm worried about." He closed the jewelry box and looked directly into her eyes. Elena's final warning. About someone we see every day, someone Claire loves. Danielle reached across the small table, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that had become natural over the months they'd been together. "We've been through everyone with access to our lives. Security staff, household employees, even Claire's teachers. Nobody fits Elena's description, unless we're missing someone obvious." Before Danielle could respond, Claire burst into the jewelry store's private room with the energy of a teenager who discovered something earth-shattering. "Dad, you need to see this," she said, clutching her laptop. "I was going through Elena's financial records again, and I found something we missed." Richard gestured for her to sit beside them, noticing how Danielle automatically shifted to include Claire in their circle. Over the past months, his daughter had begun treating Danielle less like his girlfriend and more like the mother she'd always wanted. "What did you find?" Danielle asked. "Payments to someone using a shell company called Charitable Hearts Foundation," Claire said, pulling up bank records. "Regular monthly transfers for the past 2 years. Always the same amount, always to the same account." Richard studied the financial data, his business instincts recognizing something familiar about the transaction patterns. Those amounts, they're not random. They're calculated to stay just below federal reporting thresholds. Exactly. Someone who understands financial law well enough to avoid triggering automatic investigations. Claire's excitement was infectious. But here's the really interesting part. The shell company was established using forged documents that reference our family's charitable foundation. Someone used our foundation as a template for creating false credentials, Danielle realized. Someone with intimate knowledge of how our finances are structured. Richard felt ice form in his stomach. Someone who helped us set up those financial structures in the first place. All 3 of them reached the same conclusion simultaneously, but Claire voiced it first. Uncle Marcus. Marcus Whitfield, Richard's oldest business partner and Claire's godfather. The man who'd been present at every major decision in Richard's life for the past 15 years. The man who'd had access to every security protocol, every financial account, every piece of information that Elena would have needed to orchestrate her criminal activities. It makes sense, Danielle said grimly. Elena couldn't have planned her fake death without inside help. Someone had to arrange the car accident, falsify the medical reports, coordinate with the insurance investigators. Someone she trusted completely, Richard added. Someone who'd been part of our lives so long we never questioned his loyalty. Claire was already typing furiously, cross-referencing Marcus's financial records with the timeline of Elena's criminal activities. Look at this. Uncle Marcus took 3 trips to Switzerland in the 6 months before Mom's supposed death. All business expenses, all perfectly documented. Switzerland, Danielle murmured, where Elena's been banking for the past 5 years. The evidence painted a picture that made Richard sick with betrayal. Marcus hadn't just helped Elena fake her death. He'd been her primary partner in establishing the criminal network that had threatened Richard's family. He's been playing both sides for years, Richard realized, helping Elena steal from our accounts while positioning himself as my trusted advisor. When I turned to him for support after her death, he was already planning the next phase of their operation. Which explains how the threats against our family always seem to anticipate our security measures, Danielle added. Marcus was feeding our defensive plans directly to the people trying to kill us. Claire looked up from her laptop, her young face showing an anger that reminded Richard uncomfortably of Elena. He came to Mom's funeral. He hugged me while I cried. He told me she was in a better place. While knowing she was alive and stealing money to fund criminal organizations, Richard finished. The realization that their greatest threat had been hiding in plain sight for years was overwhelming. But it also explained why Elena's arrest hadn't brought the sense of closure Richard had expected. We have to assume he knows about Elena's capture, Danielle said, shifting into tactical thinking mode. Which means he knows we have evidence that could expose his involvement. Making us targets again, Richard concluded. Making us targets who are about to get married in a public ceremony with 300 guests, Claire pointed out. If Uncle Marcus wants to eliminate our family, the wedding would be the perfect opportunity. The engagement ring sat forgotten in its velvet box as they contemplated the implications. Their moment of happiness had become another tactical problem to solve. We could postpone, Richard suggested reluctantly. Absolutely not, Danielle said firmly. Marcus has stolen enough from his family. He doesn't get to steal our wedding too. But the security risks are manageable if we plan properly. Danielle's smile carried the confidence of someone who'd faced worse odds and survived. Besides, I have an idea that turns the wedding from a vulnerability into an advantage. She leaned forward, explaining a strategy that was both audacious and elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to hide their ceremony, they would make it the most public event possible. Live-streamed to the world, attended by media, documented by professionals who would make it impossible for Marcus to act without exposing himself. A trap, Richard said, understanding immediately. A trap baited with our happiness, Danielle agreed. If Marcus wants to destroy our family, he'll have to do it in front of witnesses who will ensure he faces justice. Claire's face lit up with understanding. And I can coordinate the technical aspects. Multiple camera angles, backup live streams, real-time social media monitoring. If Uncle Marcus tries anything, the whole world will see it happen. Richard looked at the two women who'd become his entire world, marveling at their courage in the face of ongoing danger. Most people would run from a threat like Marcus. His family was planning to use their wedding as bait to catch him. There's one problem, he said. If something goes wrong, we could all die at our own wedding. If we don't stop him now, we'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, Danielle replied. I'd rather take the risk and end this permanently. Claire nodded agreement. Besides, what's the point of getting married if we're too afraid to actually live our lives together? Richard opened the ring box again, looking at the symbol of the commitment he wanted to make to the woman who'd taught him what real protection looked like. Then let's plan a wedding that Marcus Whitfield will never forget. As they left the jewelry store, Richard noticed Danielle's subtle positioning to keep herself between potential threats and Claire, a habit that had become second nature over the months of protecting his family. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I want to take you somewhere peaceful, somewhere we can just be a normal family without worrying about who might be trying to kill us." "What did you have in mind?" she asked. "I was thinking about a small island. Private beach. No internet, no phones, no business emergencies." He paused. "No guns." Danielle's laugh was warm and genuine. "I don't know if I remember how to relax without a weapon." "I'll teach you," he promised. "Right after you teach me how to trust that the people I love are safe." Claire walked slightly ahead of them, already absorbed in planning the technical aspects of their trap. But Richard caught her smile when she heard their conversation about the future, a smile that spoke of a teenager who finally believed her family might actually survive to enjoy that peaceful island together. The wedding invitation arrived with the morning coffee, formal and elegant on cream-colored cardstock. But the handwritten note attached made Richard's blood freeze. "Congratulations on your engagement. I'll be giving the bride away permanently. Love, Uncle Marcus." Claire's godfather had just declared war. The wedding dress hung in the closet like a promise of happiness, while in the shadows, a trusted uncle prepared to make sure the bride never made it down the aisle. The chapel stood like a beacon of hope against Georgia's spring landscape, dogwood blossoms creating natural confetti while guests filled pews with shared joy rather than social obligation. Security personnel mingled invisibly among family and friends, but for once, protection felt like celebration rather than siege. Richard stood at the altar, adjusting his tie for the 100th time while he watched guests arrive through the chapel's stained glass windows. Business associates, old friends, Claire's classmates with their parents, all gathered to witness something he'd never thought possible after Elena's betrayal. "You look nervous," Claire observed, appearing beside him in a bridesmaid dress that made her look older than her 15 years. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Not of marrying Danielle, but of Marcus ruining the most important day of our lives." Claire squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "He won't. We're ready for him." Through the chapel's rear entrance, Richard could see the command center Claire had established in the church basement. Multiple monitors showing security camera feeds, social media streams broadcasting their ceremony live to thousands of viewers worldwide, and communication equipment that would alert authorities the moment anything went wrong. "Showtime," Claire announced, checking her watch. "Danielle's ready." The chapel doors opened, and Richard's breath caught in his throat. Danielle walked down the aisle in a simple but elegant white dress, her natural grace making every step look like a dance. But what struck him most wasn't her beauty. It was the absolute confidence in her expression, like she was walking toward her destiny rather than just a wedding ceremony. Behind her came Agent Thompson and 3 other federal agents, disguised as wedding guests but clearly on high alert. The investigation into Marcus's activities had accelerated once they'd shared Claire's financial discoveries, and today's ceremony was as much about justice as it was about love. Danielle reached the altar, taking Richard's hands with fingers that trembled slightly despite her composed exterior. "Ready," she whispered. "For anything," he replied. The minister began the ceremony with words about love conquering adversity, about families being built through choice rather than blood, about 2 people creating something stronger together than they could ever be apart. But Richard found himself scanning the congregation, looking for signs of the threat they all knew was coming. Marcus sat in the 3rd row, exactly where he belonged as Richard's oldest business partner and Claire's godfather. He looked perfectly normal. Expensive suit, warm smile, eyes that held nothing but affection for the family he'd been planning to destroy. "Do you, Richard, take Danielle to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the minister asked. "I do," Richard said, his voice carrying across the chapel with absolute certainty. "Do you, Danielle, take Richard to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she replied, and Richard saw tears in her eyes. Not from emotion, but from the same fear he felt that something would prevent them from actually completing this moment. "If anyone objects to this union," the minister continued, "let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The chapel fell silent except for the soft sound of camera shutters and the distant hum of Claire's broadcasting equipment. Richard held his breath, waiting for Marcus to reveal himself. Instead, Marcus stood slowly and began to applaud. "Beautiful ceremony," he called out, his voice carrying easily through the chapel. "Absolutely beautiful." Other guests joined the applause, confused by the interruption but following Marcus's lead. Richard felt Danielle tense beside him, both of them recognizing that something was wrong with the scenario they'd planned for. "Thank you, Marcus," Richard said carefully. "We're honored you could be here. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Marcus's smile was warm, genuine, and completely terrifying in its normalcy. After all, family is everything. The minister looked confused but continued with the ceremony. "By the power vested in me by the state of Georgia, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Richard kissed Danielle with desperate intensity, both of them aware that they'd somehow made it through the ceremony without incident. But as guests erupted in celebration around them, Richard caught sight of Claire in the chapel balcony, her face white with terror as she stared at something on her monitoring equipment. She held up a sign she'd quickly scrawled on paper. "Bomb in basement." The realization hit Richard like ice water. Marcus hadn't planned to disrupt the ceremony. He'd planned to let it proceed normally while explosives destroyed the entire chapel and everyone in it. Danielle saw Claire's warning at the same time, her military training immediately calculating evacuation procedures and survival odds. But with 300 guests packed into a building that might explode at any moment, there was no way to save everyone. "How long?" Richard mouthed to Claire. She held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. Danielle stepped to the chapel's microphone with the calm efficiency that had first attracted Richard's attention months ago in a ballroom across town. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying easily over the celebration. "As our first act as a married couple, Richard and I would like to invite everyone outside for photographs in the beautiful garden. The lighting is perfect, and we want to capture this moment with all of you." Her tone was so natural, so filled with bridal joy, that guests immediately began moving toward the exits without question. But Richard noticed how she positioned herself to guide the flow of people, ensuring that children and elderly guests left first while able-bodied adults helped with the evacuation. Marcus remained seated, watching the exodus with interest but no apparent concern. "Aren't you coming, Uncle Marcus?" Claire called down from the balcony. "In a moment, dear," he replied, just enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Richard understood. Marcus planned to stay in the chapel, probably with some kind of remote detonator, ensuring that the explosion looked like an accident while giving him plausible deniability. "Claire," Richard called urgently. "Outside. Now." "Not without you," she replied, climbing down from the balcony with determination that reminded him of both Elena and Danielle. By now, most of the guests had moved to the garden, drawn by the promise of photographs and celebration. Only Marcus, a few stragglers, and the wedding party remained inside. "Interesting evacuation strategy," Marcus observed, standing and straightening his suit jacket. "Almost like you knew something was going to happen." Danielle stepped between Marcus and the remaining guests. "Richard, get everyone else outside. I'm not leaving you. This is what I do," she reminded him. "This is why we're perfect together. I handle the immediate threats while you protect what matters most." Richard looked at Claire, who was already herding the last elderly guests toward the exit, then back at Danielle, who stood facing Marcus with the poised confidence of someone who'd been preparing for this confrontation for weeks. 2 minutes, Claire called from the doorway. Marcus reached into his jacket, and Richard saw Danielle's hand move toward the weapon concealed beneath her wedding dress. But instead of a detonator, Marcus pulled out an envelope. "My wedding gift," he said, offering it to Richard. "I think you'll find it very enlightening." Richard took the envelope, his hands shaking as he opened it. Inside were photographs, Elena meeting with federal agents, Elena signing cooperation agreements, Elena providing testimony that would destroy the criminal network she'd helped build. "Your wife has been working with the FBI for 6 months, Marcus said calmly. "Everything that's happened, her arrest, her supposed betrayal, even this wedding, has been orchestrated to draw me into the open. The chapel doors burst open as federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. But Marcus made no move to resist, standing with his hands visible and that same warm smile on his face. Elena's been alive all along, he continued, speaking directly to Claire. Working undercover to expose the network from the inside. The funeral you cried at? The grief you carried for 5 years? All necessary sacrifices to maintain her cover. Claire's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, hope, betrayal, and finally a cold understanding that made her look far older than her 15 years. 1 minute, she said quietly. Richard realized that the countdown had never been about a bomb. It had been about federal agents getting into position to arrest Marcus without endangering the wedding guests. There is no bomb, he said. There never was, Marcus confirmed. Just a test to see how quickly you could evacuate a building full of innocent people. I have to say, your wife's performance was impressive. Danielle stepped closer to Marcus, her wedding dress somehow making her look more dangerous rather than more vulnerable. Where's Elena? Somewhere safe, preparing to testify against people who make my crimes look like traffic violations. Marcus's smile finally faltered. People who will kill her and all of you, the moment they realize she's been feeding information to federal investigators for the past year. Agent Thompson approached with handcuffs, but Marcus held up one hand. Before you arrest me, he said, you should know that Elena's cover was blown 3 hours ago. The real criminals, the ones who make arms dealing look like a legitimate business, they know she's been working with law enforcement. Where is she? Richard demanded. Safe house in the mountains. The same one you used when Morrison was hunting your family. Marcus's expression turned genuinely concerned. But not for long. These people have resources that make government protection look like a school crossing guard. Richard looked at Danielle, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. Elena might be alive, but she was in more danger now than she'd ever been while hiding among criminals. We have to help her, Claire said quietly. We have to save her, Richard agreed. Danielle checked her watch. How long do we have? Hours, not days, Marcus replied as agents cuffed him. And Richard, when you see Elena again, remember that everything she did, abandoning you, faking her death, breaking your daughter's heart, was to protect you from people who would have killed your entire family just to send a message. As Marcus was led away, Richard felt the world shifting again. His dead wife was alive. His greatest enemy had been protecting his family. His perfect wedding day had been an elaborate sting operation. But looking at Danielle in her wedding dress, ready to risk everything to save a woman who'd once been her rival, Richard realized that some truths were more important than others. So, he said, taking his wife's hand, ready for our honeymoon? Danielle's laugh was pure joy mixed with anticipation of danger. Where are we going? To save my ex-wife so she can meet my new wife properly. Claire grinned, pulling out her laptop. Best wedding day ever. The honeymoon suite overlooked the same Atlanta skyline where their story began, city lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. As he carried her across the threshold, she laughed, the sound of pure joy from someone who'd forgotten how to feel safe until she learned to trust completely. We made it, she whispered against his lips. We made it, he agreed, laying her gently on rose petals and silk. But even as they celebrated their union with passionate intensity, both knew their real adventure was just beginning. Because sometimes the greatest protection comes not from keeping the world out, but from building something strong enough to face whatever dangers come next. Together, 6 months later, the foundation they'd established was helping other families navigate the intersection of love and danger, while Claire headed to college with a full support system, and Elena worked to rebuild relationships that had been sacrificed for the greater good. Real protection, they'd learned, wasn't about walls or weapons or security systems. It was about choosing to trust completely, risk everything, and build something bigger than yourself. It was about love willing to fight for what matters most. It was about family, the kind you choose rather than the kind you're born with. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, it's about finding someone who will stand beside you when the whole world feels dangerous and make you feel like the safest person alive.